thanks a lot for coming down so early on a Saturday. It is quite early. I'm a mum these days, so actually I'm up at around 5:15, 5:30, so I've already had far too much coffee. So if I start sort of doing some kind of coffee anxiety, you know where that's coming from. All right, so a huge thanks to the PyData and NumFOCUS teams for the invite and for organizing such an excellent event. I'm sure for those of you that have attended PyData conferences, whether it be London or anywhere else abroad, know how wonderful these are. And also it does a brilliant combination of really, really practical, useful information, whilst also being fairly relaxed in a really nice environment. So really, yeah, huge clap to the organisers and all the passion and effort that goes on behind the scenes. That's not going to work. That's okay. Oh, it does work. There we go. Okay. So today I'm going to put voice to something a number of us practitioners in the ML and AI space have been wondering, which is, should we be panicking? Essentially, I find myself in a bit of a juxtaposition. I feel sometimes like I'm caught at the moment in a wind tunnel with the wind speed on full blast, thinking, what is going on? We are currently in the time where AI is proliferating every aspect of everybody's lives. And I keep thinking, oh, it's absolutely fine, to I'm actually completely panicking. The environmental impact of large language models and generative AI, it's okay. I work in AI. I can tell people that actually they shouldn't be, running loads of high compute costs that has that environmental impact, through to, will my job be here in a few years' time? Because people keep saying that it's not going to be. Right through to, what's this mean for society and the machines taking over? And kind of trying to ground myself back into the reality that actually we've been doing this for roughly the last 15 years, and it will be okay. But actually, we've never seen a time like it is today. And round and round and round my thoughts go, just like my toddler running around me doing circles at the moment. And essentially, what I like to do when I feel myself panicking is find some grounding techniques. And a good grounding technique is always to start with a decent retro. So back then, around 2014, when PyData London first existed, where were we? Well, expectations were wild. We had the whole unicorn, ivory tower data scientists, and we were expecting solo hires to deliver huge amounts of values for businesses when actually their data stacks were in complete disarray, didn't understand any of the principles. And now we see the world where actually a huge amount of organizations have data science embedded into the day-to-day, whether they be tech first or non-tech organizations. So on that note, can I just see a show of hands of who considers themselves to be a data practitioner? Hopefully everybody. Yes. Hopefully most of us, right? I was hoping for about 90% of the room. Back in sort of 2013, 2014, when I first started talking about data science and machine learning up in where I lived at the time, Manchester, the show of hands was 2 out of maybe 100. So we were like really on the low side of data practitioners proliferating into the business. I'll talk about that in a bit. There was lots more variation on roles has now occurred. Before, we were very much focused as sort of the jack of all trades of all things data, right through from the pipelines, right through to delivering a model. And now we've kind of got specialisms around commercial, research, image generation, right through to product management of data science and kind of the pipelining side. Equally, we've seen our career paths and journeys no longer so limited as they were. Before, we were very much kind of stuck to a certain point in our organizations. You were the data scientist or the data person, and that's what anything data related you went to. And now we're proliferating in a range of industries and fields. There was little way in kind of terms of a data science or machine learning lifecycle. Team data science processes developed by Microsoft back in 2016 hadn't even been founded yet. And so now we have our sort of standards, processes, and that's a huge part of the open source community. We had limited communities. It was quite rare to run into somebody that was actually working in the field, not just sort of talking about what the field could potentially bring their business. And now we're proliferated with open source conferences, many, many meetups, and certainly down here in London, I think you can pretty much go to a data event any night of the week. And it was really hard to do basic stuff, right? So, around 2014, if you wanted to do any kind of text extrapolation, you were still hard coding your regex. And now we're in a completely different landscape when it comes to natural language processing. I'm going to say no more because we'll get onto some of that. Algorithmic training power has fundamentally shifted our landscape, and so has, therefore, the proliferation of capabilities and tools that we've built on top of that. And finally, I was sick of all the conversations around 80% of machine learning model projects fail. And now there's sort of an understanding of some of the cultural changes that need to happen in order to ensure that AI machine learning actually is successful. And in all of this time, we've seen things like the arrival of TensorFlow in 2015, arrival of Docker for some deployment capabilities, 2014, scikit-learn 1.0 got released in 2021, and now we're in the era of vibe coding, circa 2025, and we'll see where that brings us. And everybody gets sick of seeing these hype cycles, but the reality is that some stuff hasn't changed. But I don't think we're in a hype cycle any longer, because fundamentally the expectations have never been higher, and that's because of what's happening in our landscape. So what is happening? Now, I'm not here to throw up a slide about the revolutionary inventions and their impacts, and let's go back to the printing press and the changes that happened. I think we all know, as practitioners, we're already in this AI era which is outstripping any precedent around velocity and scale of revolutions that have happened before. We are living in every single day the latest Gen AI releases, VO3 for anybody panicking about those videos, hardware developments, and how conversations about how agents are coming for our jobs. Now, what that results in is me feeling a little bit like the space is exhausting, overwhelming, and incredibly oversaturated at times. And why is that? So, right now, we are really living in an AI arms race. We're not really in this hype cycle anymore. We've reached the inflection point where AI capabilities have matured beyond the proof of concept to deliver measurable business results. And that's from research by McKinsey. They also say that companies that prioritize AI are seeing 5 times faster growth. So we're definitely at this point now where we're just outstripping businesses out. Expectations are raising and raising. The highest revenue AI companies in 2025 have outstripped the highest growing software as a service companies in 2018. And that's that FT graph that you can see there with the red and the blue lines. The red line represents the 30 million gross revenue by AI companies, and the blue line is software as a service companies in 2018. And also the US is just widening their commanding lead in the global AI investment. US private AI investment hit 109 billion in 2024, and that's nearly 12 times higher than China's 9.3 billion. And that's 24 times higher than the UK's 4.5 billion. So the gap is growing really pronounced in generative AI, and there's a kind of this arms race. And finally, we're also seeing the horror stories that go with that. And for anybody that's seen AI 2027 doing the rounds, there's some pretty outright interesting hypotheses and statements that are kind of baked in as scientific fact. And I think there's a lot of scaremongering that goes with these sorts of stories when you present something that's as science, that's actually some presumptions and maybe some fairly good probabilistic guesses, but certainly not fact. We're now in the rise of the AI-first company. We're no longer AI-enabled. We are now AI-native, AI-first. And that's because we've hit the point where performance of models are sort of starting to outbeat human performance on a variety of capabilities. And companies are jumping on that bandwagon. So we've seen the likes of Klarna, Shopify, Duolingo, Box, their CEOs coming out and stating that they're going to be AI first. But actually, already, since I wrote that slide at the beginning of May, Klarna has backtracked because they were going to have a number of their customer services run by AI agents. And they've come back to say, actually, we've realized that customers prefer the experience of human. And also Duolingo, after the CEO of Duolingo came out and a public letter was released around how they were going to be going to ensure that they were using AI and validating whether or not a job should exist or could use AI. He's now backtracked from that statement due to a lot of public scrutiny. My big question is AI first going to essentially be like the tech first of the 2010s, where actually the terminology doesn't really matter anymore because it's just a fundamental capability that underpins where we are at the moment? We're moving into this AI-enabled workforce. There's a shift to thinking about how we will be agent-enabled. And a lot of this is driven by some of the big reporting agencies, McKinsey, Gartner, and then this one is from the Microsoft Work report that 78% of leaders are considering hiring for AI-specific roles to prepare for the future. And there's a lot of kind of speculation that we're going to move to sort of diamond-shaped companies. So the traditional pyramid structure of our organizations will be turned fundamentally and disrupted. But I still question how we're going to get the people into the diamond to begin with, and how do they know and understand. So there's a lot of big questions for me. And by the way, my talk isn't just about what's going on in AI. I do get to some interesting stuff for us practitioners in a bit, because I know that a lot of you will know what's going on in the space. I'm very worried about the AI environmental cost. I think it's because I'm married to a climate scientist. And even here in the climate tech space, there's so much push to use generative AI for climate. And the fundamental thing is actually, it's not really that good at that in the moment, but the cost is exacerbating. And there's a couple of things going on here. So, as of May 2025, so last month, emissions from data centers used to train and deliver AI services were estimated to be approximately 3% of global emissions. And that's similar to the total of the aviation industry. And while it's really hard for us to actually know what the energy consumption looks like, because a lot of the private organizations aren't releasing information about this, we are getting to a point now where we really understand some of the estimates just from the fact of the increase of the data center growth, where water, carbon is fundamental, and also because of the skyrocketing investment in companies like NVIDIA. Now, I'm not disputing that LLMs and other generative AI capabilities will get more efficient and will become more and more, will therefore decrease their energy consumption. But this is at a conflict with the fact that we're proliferating these capabilities across the space. So now search is underpinned by generative AI. And people don't understand that actually behind the scenes, therefore, there's a huge energy consumption happening. And some stats on that, for example, is that the cost of querying an AI model that scores the equivalent of ChatGPT 3.5. Sorry, that's not the right one. Sorry about that. Just give me a second. Sorry. So, with regards to Intel's TinyBERT and Hugging Face's DistillBERT, actually, those consume quite a minimal amount of energy. So that's around 0.06 watt per hours per 1,000 queries. So similar for an LED light bulb for 20 seconds. But in contrast, OpenAI's ChatGPT 4 is and Anthropic's Claude use 1,000 times more energy for the same query. And the challenge is that the general public and the general consumer doesn't necessarily understand that. And the thing is, the more and more these tools are used, even the efficiency won't outstrip the demand of use. And so we're in a tricky scenario when it comes to kind of carbon and water costs. And energy costs will be improved. Like there's one of the newer data centers has just been opened, and it's the Stargate data center will draw 100 megawatts of electricity, but it's all being run by 300-foot tall wind turbines in West Texas. So we are seeing some changes on that front, but fundamentally, water is still a huge cost, and cooling water is still a big practice within data centers. Okay. Yeah, AI slop. So the reality is that at the moment, we're still in a situation where the quality of a lot of these capabilities is still not there. And we're in this situation where low quality, automatically generated content is flooding the internet because artificial intelligence tools are able to create them at a scale we haven't seen before. And the phenomenon means that we make jokes about this, but actually, these low-grade AI-generated materials are being kind of thrown out at us for a set of eyes. We're in the hyper-consumerism. Everybody's a pair of eyes that wants to see things. And actually, a lot of what we're seeing that's generated is quite poor. And whilst we recognize that things are going to improve, fundamentally, we are just, as the journalist Max Reed stated, this is the perfect internet marketer's tool. It's precision built to serve the disposable, lowest common denominator demands of the infinite internet scroll. So it's literally there for us just to keep addicted to scrolling to our phones. It's not really serving anybody. And we all know that their biggest strength, but also the biggest danger, is the ability to sound very authoritative on any topic, and irrespective of its factual accuracy. And we have a big truth problem. Truth is really, really hard to define, no matter where you sit. And then that runs into how we're defining our reward value trade-offs for LLMs. And so that's a big paradigm shift for us, because human truth is very subjective. It's very biased, and that's kind of the heart of where we're going to get if we actually want these models to stop hallucinating. But the general public probably doesn't really understand the nature of hallucination and why at the heart of that things are hallucinating. And AI regulation. So obviously the EU saw, I should say, last year the EU AI Act come into play. A number of companies in the EU and in the UK have kind of followed suit. The FT's come out with a strong AI policy. But here we are today in May 2025, where a number of US regulations have come into play. A big up curve in the bottom right chart. You can see a huge up curve in the number of regulatory policies. But we're at the same point where in May 2025, Trump has introduced what he wants to get through the Senate, his big, beautiful bill, which means that there'll be a moratorium on states regulating, so the states, them legislating and regulating any AI policy for the next 10 years. And that's a kind of a really scary place when you hear about the stat I said about $109 billion investment in AI in 2024, combined with this kind of landscape of regulation where the US are kind of trying to really backtrack and allow kind of full competitive edge around AI, but actually at the same time opening up the floodgates to discrimination, bias, and rules like the don't quote me on this one, I'm running off the back of my head from the article, but the Elvis policy in Tennessee, where you cannot impersonate, and those will be overruled by this moratorium. Okay. So to kind of summarize it, we all know that AI is not an indiscriminate tool. It's not, but the thing is that where we are right now is that the global population is starting to see that AI is a hammer, but not recognizing that everything is a nail. This is a pretty complex image. It was written by Axbom in 2023, and it still holds up today. And because it touches on a number of the different aspects around obscure data theft. So it copies the design of most constructs in the Western industrialized world without consent and strives to mimic the most average one of those. So to become as good as they are in their current form, many generative AI systems have been trained on vast amounts of data that were not intended for this purpose. The bias and injustice, by design, the hammer will often just hit the thumb of black, brown, and undeserved people. By being trained on large amounts of data, often unsupervised, they inevitably reproduce any of that in the output. This will happen often unnoticeably. I touched a lot on carbon costs because I'm quite passionate about that. But the energy used is about 100 times greater than achieving a similar result. Oh, it's back. There we go. Yay. There's nothing like that anxiety, coffee-fueled moment of like, oh, the slides have gone. And the carbon cost. So the 100 times energy is probably a little bit inaccurate, actually, but the statement still remains the same, that actually there is still better ways to use. Not everything is a nail. I'm starting to learn about people that like writing wedding speeches using Gen AI, and I'm like, what happened to the passion of the heart? What happened to like human? I'll talk a bit about human agency in a bit, but what happened to us just being our authentic selves? Kind of monoculture and power concentration. I was chatting to a professor of AI who's been a professor for the last 20 years in this space, and he refers to this as kind of AI colonialism. The hammer is made by a small Western and wealthy subset of humanity, creating costly barriers to entry. A lot of invisible decision making. Computations will estimate your aim, tend to miss the nail and push for a different design, often unnoticeably. Accountability projection. If the hammer breaks and hurts someone, the manufacturer will claim the hammer has a mind of its own, and they can't help you. And we're seeing a lot of that in the legal space right now. The amount of the legal space is getting a huge amount of investment and revenue through a lot of these challenges around implementing AI, patents, and also source of accountability. Gerrymandering around misinformation, data privacy and breaches, and then moderator trauma. So, I'll give it a minute. I think, there we go. Should we be panicking? Be prepared while I use my creative license to make some sweeping generalizations. Everyone is now an AI expert. Yep, get used to the AI fluency comfortability programs being a prerequisite for a lot of organizations, as well as a lot of people having on their job specs and CVs that they are knowledgeable about AI. It's going to become a base currency, much like being familiar with a laptop or phone is. And we should be prepared for that that's a very different flavor to being a data practitioner, right? So we're going to see this rise in AI literacy programs, and I don't think we should be worried about that. But what we do need to be worried about is the assumptions that people make off the back of those literacy programs. What I've started to see in my own business is that people have moved from business outcomes to essentially tech briefs. And in my career, for the last 15 years, I've only ever really seen user stories, business outcomes to determine what somebody wants from AI, machine learning, data science. And now we're in this place where people think that they can give me a tech brief for how it should be done. This LLM should underpin what we're doing. And I challenge them on this, and it's because people have gotten to this head because they've done one-hour video podcast on what AI is. They are now suddenly an expert. And I think it's about lowering our kind of expectations. You can hear I could get quite heated about this. And using kind of a new skill of ours, which isn't just our communication, our excellent storytelling, but also to kind of empathy and kind of allowing like that forum of conversation and discussion to allow people to come to the right table. And much like not everyone needs to be a mechanic to drive a car, I think we sort of start to see this tendency of people who are roadworthy with AI without having to understand the combustion engine. Ooh. Yeah. No, you just can't get an LLM to do that. So, I think we are still in a place where the current quality of LLMs are not able to do analysis. And they're not particularly good at it, and that's because they're not very good at reasoning, right? And so we have to make sure that our organizations understand that good analysis still relies on reliability, transparency, and reproducibility. And whilst the LLMs and co-pilots can assist in some of those, it can't do the whole end-to-end pipeline. And so whilst AI models are still excelling tasks like the mathematical Olympiad problems, they're still often failing at our complex reasoning and logic tasks. The other day I had an external vendor say to me that they were going to send over the data report on how the inner workings of a model were happening, but their LLM needed some fine tuning. And I was like, what are you talking about? So I'm going to wait to see what that report looks like. But we're definitely here where kind of quasi-AI practitioners are thinking that they can run LLMs over analyses to kind of get these synthesized logic. I haven't seen the output of it, so watch this space for me to come back and talk about how good it is. We're in the era of increasingly inflated and incorrect expectations. I like to think of this as a pot noodle versus the crock pot, right? Good data analysis relies still on high quality data jiu-jitsu, curated data over large timeframes for the most part. Yes, there are stochastic elements to what's happening in our space at the moment, but fundamentally it goes back to garbage in, garbage out. And the challenge we're in at the moment is that a lot of businesses want instant gratification from the AI wave that we're in. And so if they haven't already had good focus on their data ops, haven't good thought about what it is to actually collate data in a good cleansed, appropriately captured way, we're still going to be in a position where we can't instantly write a model over the top of it. So the models themselves are getting better, quicker, easier to tune, but fundamentally there's still a lot behind the scenes that is my lovely slow-cooked dinner. And it's not to say that the pot noodle isn't useful, again, especially when you have the toddler, but actually there's nothing better than a good home-cooked meal. The importance of data ops is still fairly misunderstood by our organizations. And that's because I think data ops doesn't show instantaneous value, right? So the plumbing, the semantic layers, the fact that our upstream defects can really impact our models alongside pipeline orchestration. Whilst we can run LLMs over these and make our pipelines more automated, it's still just increasing the impact of garbage in and garbage out. And we still currently rely on a lot of human agency. So this was my prompt after I asked ChatGPT, because we rolled out ChatGPT to everybody in our organization at the FT through a commercial license. And I prompted ChatGPT to put me in the "this is fine" meme and gave it a photo of myself. And this was what came up. And then so I asked it, why am I holding a glass of Prosecco? Its response was, you're right, that wasn't part of your description. The Prosecco was an unintended creative flourish. And the challenge is that we know this. We understand temperature is pretty high on a lot of these underlying foundation models. But the challenge is that the general human user probably doesn't understand that why. I also asked it why it had the dog in there as well. And the dog was apparently another creative flourish. And what I want to talk about here is I don't want to just throw up a lovely photo of my toddler and my dog. Take a good look at this photo. This was done by a photographer that I worked with for the last 12 years. She took photos of my wedding. And at Christmas, we went to see her again. And she took some great shots of my toddler and dog together. Now, few hands who can see what's wrong with the new photo. Yeah, my dog has grown an extra leg. What was the prompt? The prompt was make the snow fluffier, right? And so this is actually what came through. And the thing is that my photographer is not a bad photographer. She's great. But the thing is that human agency is still important on the top. Validation is still really important for us. And the photos, see, I was obviously just showing off too much. And the validation is really, really important. So the reality is that we're currently still, as data practitioners, a really relatively small number of the workforce. According to Gartner's 2024 Data and Analytics benchmark report last year, we're still overall full-time data and analytics employees comprise only 1% of the company workforces today. And that's 6% in medium-sized organizations, 6% in small organizations, 0.6% in medium, and 0.4% in large companies. So if you think about the really large companies out there, and the fact that full-time data and analytics employees are only making 0.4%, but these are the organizations that are coming out and saying, we want to be AI first, who's holding anything accountable in these organizations? Who actually understands what they're allowing to go on in their organization? A very, very small proportion of the business. And it's not to say that they can't educate other parts of the business, but for me, like mathematical understanding, probabilistic determination, and the fundamental understanding that comes with that is such a core value to what we're allowing to proliferate that we do need to reinforce that trained data practitioners should be at the front of helping our organizations understand what they're allowing. I think it just needs a little minute to catch back up. Give it a second. There we go. And for us, Gen AI operationalization realities are still really nascent, right? Value and reward trade-offs and the term of reward engineering is still really, really new. And we may have solved for kind of technology challenges, but our cultural embedding still exists. We're going to see things like where recommendation systems that are underpinned by generative AI rather than traditional reinforcement learning start to have gotchas in them where actually it's the hidden cost of loss would be, can be in the millions. Similarly, because like things like where toxic moderation, we might see that models are misclassifying some of that and therefore suppressing a high number of content rather than allowing that to be exposed. So enter the era of AI DIY. I think why some of us are a little bit panicking is probably because the professional services have never been disrupted like it has this way. This is probably where some of this idea that we're going to move to pyramid-shaped companies is coming from, because fundamentally, the trades industry has been disrupted for years. You can go to B&Q, you can buy a pot of paint, you can buy a washer for your plumbing, and you can do home DIY yourself. But with the advent of vibe coding and the advent of AI proliferation, people are now able to kind of engineer their own lightweight AI apps. But hopefully, people still want to call in the professionals when it requires it. I did flood my own kitchen a few years doing a lot of plumbing under my kitchen. I actually didn't call in a professional. I just took 3 days to fix it. So I don't know how encouraging this analogy is, but I definitely think we need to acknowledge that it's okay that there's a space for people to do a little bit of DIY. It's just how much education do we need to give them? Okay. And much like I'm trying to do right now while I'm having my tech challenges, keeping calm. So I've talked about these rather few obvious principles for the last 10 years. And I wasn't here today to kind of wow you with like brand new, like cutting edge information. What I'm here to do is to voice to something that I've been frustrated about over the last few years for a while. And hopefully you can all engage in the conversation over the weekend as you do learn new things and you do learn some interesting techniques. But I want us to keep in these sort of principles. So be uncomfortable with comfortable. It's a timely reminder that we've always been in a nascent field, right? We've always been trying to understand how to figure it out. We've had to go through creating our own processes. We have to understand what the data science lifecycle was like without ever knowing what the data science lifecycle was like. And the pace of development in our field will continue to outstrip the pace that we as individuals can keep up. And I don't think you need to know everything, but it has, and that's why I think it's okay to be a little bit uncomfortable. It's going to be a really wild ride, and it's going to continue to be. And I think the thing to remind us all is that as data practitioners, our job was always to tell stories about data to the business that they didn't want to hear, right? That's the really uncomfortable truth, right? Most organizations still want data to tell them the story that they've already come up with in their head. And that's a really uncomfortable position. So we're actually really good at this. And I think, as Volta said, doubt is an uncomfortable condition, but certainty is a ridiculous one, which is why I'm not coming out with any big claims for next year, because I don't know what the landscape's going to look like in 2026. But I want to be comfortable with the fact that I am in a pretty interesting space, and I'm also, riding the wave that brings with it. we still need to stop constantly justifying AI spend. We need to think much more about how it's embedded into our business. We still keep getting challenged with what was the return on investment of this AI, machine learning, data science project. But it's really, really hard, okay? The challenge is that you've got complexity in the gains, too many costs of estimation unknowns, justifying the experiments that never get deployed, investments across a huge range of the data suite, from infrastructure to tools through to the governance and insight. All of that pipeline is just creating a huge attribution problem. And it's complicated because we know that actually the value isn't often just a number. It's spread across departments, teams, business units, programs of work. And measuring ROI for data science project is generally a project in itself. And the fact is that as AI continues to proliferate, and we come in this juxtaposition where organizations want to know what the value of their AI program were, it becomes a big attribution problem where actually we're going to see this kind of new industry of team in the finance part of our businesses spun up, which is just to justify the cost of spending on things like a commercial license with Anthropic or OpenAI. And I'm a bit worried about that space because essentially under the hood of them, if they're deployed correctly, they're just efficiency tools. But I think it's creating this very interesting conundrum where actually, the workforce shift and dynamics is, oh, well, that means that everybody's this much more productive. So what does that mean for ... Okay. And please remind yourselves that is generative AI worth the resource and infrastructure cost? I think like a lot of organizations are still wanting to prove out the ROI spend here when a lot of the problems are still not LLM or Gen AI worthy. And I'm very worried about that huge cost that's kind of hidden under the scene. I'll talk about proof of concepts in a bit. And so at the FT, we tell compelling AI stories that are mapped to business metrics. This is our metrics that matter framework. And so essentially we have our North Star, which is our global paying audience, and then different departmental levers that sit underneath that. And I think it's still about telling these stories because that captures the whole of the pipeline. Be wary of the proof of concept trap. So we're really comfortable with products evolving, but there's still a lot of situations where we've got our models that were built in 2017 still churning away, hidden, non-maintained. And I don't think that's as prominent as it was a few years ago. But the thing is, as we go into this new landscape, I think what organizations are still doing, and I hear a lot of talk about, is start proof of concept first, get the business value proven out. But really, we do have to start ops first, right? We need to think, how is this going to plug into everything else that it touches, behaves on? How is it fundamentally changing my underlying data architecture? What's my reinforcement pipelines if I use the output of that Gen AI model to train other models? What does that mean for us as organizations? Those are the questions that we need to be asking, and not does a proof, where can we apply this? I think those are still the wrong questions. And I just definitely think we need to be very careful of the Gen AI Pandora's box. And we need to be questioning ourselves about what data was used for training, refinement, retrieval augmented generation, which systems touch that data before it hit production. How do I validate this new foundation model for my specific use case? These are the types of things that we should be asking before we go into proof of concept. Focus on your own needs. I still think we're definitely in the Jurassic Park instance of, should you be applying this? And is your organization crawling, walking, running? What currently exists? The data, the logic, architecture, infrastructure, piping to user experience. And before you further automate, does it even need to exist? Like, what are you actually creating, and does it actually have value for whoever your end customer actually is, whether it be internal or external? And I do think we've got a lot of Gen AI wagging the dog. An equivalent of the tail wagging the dog is Gen AI wagging our business users, kind of like making them use this capability when actually not everything is a nail, and please don't always use the hammer. And it's still critical to have the right people, despite kind of all these estimations that the data science role might not exist in 5 years' time. At the moment, we still have to make sure that we've got where we've come from, kind of the data scientist through to MLOps engineer. And we used to talk about all these different roles, data translator, data explorer. And we realized that actually higher domain expertise is fundamental to embedded data science. And now we've seen things like the Gen AI consultant, LLM engineer, MLOps engineer. And I think the thing that I've realized is that where we went, which was a kind of a data scientist jack of all trades, when we were the one person in a business doing data science, we've moved through to very domain speciality. And I think now we're moving back to actually being really good generalists across the AI and data science landscape, but with really fundamental business understanding across your domain. And by the way, LLMs can't do that right now. And finally, sorry, I've got a couple more. Get okay with people not getting data and ML, but definitely being experts in AI. And I think it goes back to this great image from Andy Scherpenberg, which is this is my adaptation of it, and what companies think AI or machine learning looks like. And where we're now is that people think AI can just stretch the whole pipeline, right? And LLMs are just notoriously bad at analysis. And so because they still can't reason, and nor is LLM a database, you can't just apply AI across the pipeline. And despite the AI market kind of rolling out these AI fluency programs, not everyone will be able to understand the underlying intricacies of model and operational development. And why businesses don't care so much about all the intricacies, I do think there's an increased focus on regulation, legal compliance, and I do think that's a really good thing for our space. And it's critical for kind of interpretability and explainability still throughout the ops pipeline, such that we can help our legal and our compliance teams. And so when the world doesn't really understand all the inner workings, it can feel like hitting your head against a brick wall. But the reminder is that the hard graft isn't necessarily the model, but it's the data extraction, preparing ground truth labels, exploring and refining performance metrics, and right through to kind of making sure that data and evaluation is a critical part of what you're doing. Be on guard for organizational misalignment. So kind of our business's hopes, dreams, and desires, looks like Marge here, but kind of the organizational embedding is still critical. There's going to be change in your stakeholder decision-making through whatever new capability is rolled out. You've got to think about how siloed your capability is versus cross-collaborative with your domain experts. Competing priorities, everybody wants Gen AI for their business problem. Can you look at vendors or partnerships to enable some parts of your business? Domain area understanding is still a weakness that I see. Understanding whether or not if in your organization, if you build it, should you own it? And incorrect AI reward signals. And I think we're going to see more and more of that over the next few years. And the choices that you've made are less important than having made the choice. The landscape is overwhelming, right? And I think we as data folks, or I'll speak for myself, we're, fundamentally, sorry, there we go. We have quite a few insecurities as practitioners, and it's complex out there. But variety is spice of life, and you just need to pick something sometimes. And I do wish we could go back to the days when R versus Python was the great debate. And I really, really do wish that the R is dead would stop going around on LinkedIn at the moment, because I do feel like it's a lot of people that don't understand our field that are talking about this. And finally, great process doesn't equal great outcomes, right? So you can have the best process, and that works for other areas like product, engineering for the most part, but data science is still a mathematical probability at its heart, okay? Now, I'm not talking about LLMs hallucinating or trying to justify that, because that's a whole different ballgame. But what I am talking about is that we create hypotheses and we try to prove them out with data. And that won't always pay off. And that's where the 80% of ML models talk used to come from, but covered up in a cultural embedding. But your business and you still need to realize that actually a lot of those experiments won't pay off. And if you have a situation where actually a logistic regression model is a heck of a lot better than an LLM, worthwhile to recognize that don't create a huge complex process over something that doesn't require it. And so you can use Gen AI to kind of increase some of the parts of your process, good documentation, writing up scripts to champion your work, kind of helping you with it prioritization. But fundamentally, at the heart of it, you're still solving math problems. And here I am with my glass of wine to say thank you. I'm going to sit back and let the room be on fire for the next few years and see what happens. But I would say that human authenticity is still critical. Whilst I've used ChatGPT to generate some of the images in this slide, and I did spell check them because that's really annoying me at LinkedIn at the moment. I just question right now, how far do we need to step into the synthesized landscape before we need to converge and realize actually community is at the heart of what we are as humans?